the chance to draft, no hyperbole, maybe the best, most impressive football player of all time. Like, what this guy does is unbelievable. I don't know how you would want to put yourself in a position as a person who plays fantasy football and not want to draft one of the most unicorny of unicorns imaginable when he's available in like the 6th round. It's crazy to me, and I think people should be all in on it.
The wide receivers that have the most upside in fantasy football drafts, that's what we're talking about today on the RotoViz Fantasy Football Podcast. My name is Colm Kelly. I'm joined once again by Jakob Sanderson. We did talk earlier this week when we went through running back backfields that will decide fantasy football championships. I would recommend heading back and checking that one out if you haven't done so already once we finish up here. I love talking some high upside wide receivers, so we're going to dive in straight away. When we look at drafting for upside, I think it's something that people can get wrong. We'll talk about the risky element of it in a minute, but people think, upside is like you're taking a complete swing and the floor is 0 and the ceiling is 100 and there's no kind of range of outcomes in between. What should listeners be kind of thinking about or looking for when they're thinking about drafting players for upside?
Yeah, I think that ultimately at the wide receiver position, part of the appeal is that I think that often the idea of drafting for upside and drafting for floor are more correlated than people think, because the wide receiver position is primarily driven by talent. If you are the most talented wide receiver on your team, you're usually going to earn the most targets on your team. The volume is earned in a major way. And so when you're focusing on drafting as talented of wide receivers as you can, I think you're linking a lot of the draft for upside and the draft for floor aspect. Now, of course, where that gets more interesting is that when we're drafting a lot of these players that we're considering in the upside range, it's rookies, it's year 2 players, and that idea of the talent is very uncertain. That being said, I think especially in this year's draft economy, last year's draft economy, where in many ways the 0 RB folks have kind of won the war on ADP. We're drafting wide receivers earlier than we have previously. To me, it's almost pointless to be drafting wide receivers for floor in this draft market, because most of the middle rounds, exactly, in most of the middle rounds, the running backs are just frankly projecting better in a way that they used to not when I was drafting a lot of 0 RB teams. So I think you have to adjust your frame of reference and think, well, if I'm going to make a wide receiver choice, here, I might be sacrificing a bit of projection anyways. So I better be making this as an upside swing, not as a floor swing. And for that reason, I think that needs to be your motivating factor is, can this wide receiver be, on par with the types of wide receivers we're drafting in round 1 and round 2? Would this be a wide receiver I can picture myself drafting in round 1 and round 2 next year, for instance, is I think a way of looking at it that I know Sean and Ben and folks with RotoViz always try to look at it in a really smart way. So I think that you need to be focusing on that upside outcome at the wide receiver position, and how we get there, it comes through a lot of factors, and I'm excited to talk about some of the guys and how we apply that today.
Yeah, I think you had it there as well. And the risky, I think when it comes to whether it was drafting 0 RB in the past, people would say it was risky, because you don't have running backs. But I factor risk in fantasy football into sometimes playing it safe is actually the risky play, and playing far floor, because if you end up with 8 floor players, your team is going to be really middle of the pack rather than trying to elevate your roster. And you had on it there with the kind of drafting for next season. I'm always looking at these boards, and this is where the players we talk about today, quite a few of them will be younger. They might be even into the 4th year, for example. But a lot of this, when you're trying to project to the following season, there's not going to be a lot of these guys who are 28, 29 that are going to make that jump from round 5 to round 2 next year. It's going to be those younger names who are then entering, you say, year 3, for example. So we will dive in.
I'll also just say really quick, I think sometimes the people the names that people say are high floor names are often, to me, the riskiest names. I think people just think about floor so wrong, where often the names that you hear of high floor, usually a lot of the time it's kind of mid talents or older players who have a clean path to targets. And it's that, to me, is not a high floor player. That is a fragile player. That is a player who's dependent on your
they fit for
circumstances being correct. But there is a chance that they are just not good, or not good anymore, or the circumstances, the environment isn't as good as you thought, because there's some player that you thought was a nothing who emerges as a target threat, or whatever. To me, any player who is buoyed by circumstance is not high floor, but oftentimes those are the players that are discussed as high floor.
Yeah, and like you can say the floor. When you think of the floor, I often think like you're kind of there, like that floor can fall out, from those veteran players or from those situations. I often think about those kind of players that you're referencing there as, we talk about the dead zone for running backs. To me, they're dead zone wide receivers. Like they're not going to be able to elevate your roster, and they're getting projected to a certain spot of the draft based on projected volume, projected role. And those are the sort of running backs we've always feared in those situations, is like what happens in week 4 when, the floor falls out of those guys. So the one last question before you get into names is, in drafts, I tend to I have my targets and my priorities, and I'm going to target them pretty much in all drafts. And then at the end, I'll see well, I have more rookies than maybe I would have wanted, or maybe but it's going to be a combination for second, third year players in general, unless there's certain players that I like that maybe fall outside of that cohort. But I would say 65+% are going to definitely be in that cohort of players. But are you trying to balance that out in any formats, or are you just trying to, swing for the fences and win these championships?
Yeah, probably more of the latter. I tend to not keep that much of a ledger on how many rookies I'm drafting, maybe to my own detriment. I was doing a main event last night, stream with Liam Murphy and Ron Stewart, and we get through, I forget how many rounds. And in my mind, I thought we had been kind of drafting responsibly. And some people in the chat start being like, how many rookies are you guys going to draft? I start counting them up, and I'm like, well, I guess we did take, Trevion Henderson in the 4th, Travis Hunter in the 5th, Colson Loveland in the 7th, Matthew Golden in the in the 8th. And I'm like, oh yeah, actually that is a lot of rookies. Dylan Sampson in the 10th. I'm like, okay, we did have 5 through 10. That's a fair point. And in my mind, we were actually drafting not that rookie heavy of a team. So probably what I think of as a rookie heavy team and what some people think of as a rookie heavy team may not be quite the same thing.
Yeah, I think we could be in the same boat there, but they're the players that we're not going to talk about the particular running backs, but when you're looking there, we talked a little bit about Breece Hall, for example, on the last show. You're looking at a Hampton or a Henderson, going in the same round, Henderson going after RJ Harvey, who we talked about. You're looking at the upside versus the running backs going in the same area, where we kind of know what those running backs have done in the past, but they're also in a trajectory where it's likely going in a downward area rather than upward. I'm going to go through this in kind of ADP order from the wide receiver position. And we did talk about Breece Hall in the last show on the Jets. Garrett Wilson is somebody I've never doubted talent. We're talking about you're saying the floor plays with the situation being good. Garrett Wilson's kind of the opposite of that, where the situation has always been tough for him at quarterback. I know he had Aaron Rodgers, but it was kind of the ghost of Aaron Rodgers at that particular point of his career. But we're going into Justin Fields' offense now. Is he somebody that you think, I think there's a chance that he hits a massive ceiling this year, but he also doesn't completely get into my targeting for upside, because I do see it much more of a kind of probably 30-70 split in favor of it not hitting the ceiling.
Yeah, Wilson might be the rare wide receiver that I actually do think is a high floor, low ceiling player, because I think the combination of his talent, the really barren supporting cast around him, means that I think he's one of the safest bets to see that 28 to 32% target share, but it's 28 to 32% of what, right? Are we going to see how many dropbacks are the Jets going to have? And it's the Justin Fields offense. So however many dropbacks you're going to have, you can cross off 25% of those as sacks, scrambles, throwaways. And so it's going to be a struggle, I think, for Wilson to hit the type of ceiling that you can dream on for other receivers, because even if you project a 30% target share, which I would, you're still probably hitting, 140, 150 targets from a pretty inconsistent quarterback. So I think you really struggle to envision a world in which Garrett Wilson has a higher ceiling than the wide receiver 10. But I do think that the floor is very high, because I think he's very good. And I think the situation is is good for his floor in terms of the lack of target competition around him. For that reason, I'm more interested in a like best ball tournament format where I think that I think one thing people underestimate in those tournament formats is that just having like live players who have a weekly ceiling is more important sometimes than having like that massive season long ceiling, because it is a weekly tournament, like in Best Ball Mania, for instance, where if you just have good players with weekly ceilings and they advance and they're live, then, you know, anybody is kind of a weighted coin flip to beat anybody else going into those weekly pods. So I'm more interested in him there. But in like the main event in the FFPC, where it's sort of sprint based best ball, less interested for sure in anything like that, because I think his seasonal ceiling is somewhat capped.
Yeah, I think the efficiency could be the issue, particularly pairing him with the quarterback in terms of how those plays occur and the upside then being linked into that. JSN, obviously, he is a quarterback situation with Sam Darnold, who I'm not a fan of. Big fan of Sam Darnold, not a big fan of his quarterback situation here with the Seahawks kind of shifting offense, kind of leaning more on this offense towards the Kenneth Walker side of it. But JSN like had a breakout last year, entering his third year, potential to take that next leap. And you know, we're talking about players could be a first round pick next season. If he does what he did last year, like he's pushing himself up into that kind of probably 10 through 12 range, I think, for ADP for next season. So JSN, is he an upside target?
Man, I want to bet on JSN because I thought he was really impressive over the second half of last year. But if we're all being honest with ourselves about the numbers, we still have not seen him hit a 2 yards per route run yet in 2 seasons. And he did that with Geno Smith, who I happen to think is quite good. He's now getting, I think, a pretty substantial downgrade at quarterback. And he's on a team that basically fired their play caller for passing too much. So we're looking at a kind of low to intermediate ADOT wide receiver who has been good, but I wouldn't say has elevated to great yet from a statistical perspective. And then there's this real fly in the ointment of what if in the weeks that all the money is on the line, they start Jalen Milroe. And that could have like an Anthony Richardson-esque effect on this offense where we're talking minus 15 pass rate over expectation potentially with a very raw run first rookie quarterback. So I unfortunately view JSN as a small hit, big miss player this year. I think the small hit is he continues to progress. Sam Darnold looks more like Minnesota Sam Darnold than the rest, but we're still talking about a run first offense in which JSN has, you know, kind of an intermediate to short area target volume. And we're looking at maybe he beats his positional ADP by, 3 to 5 slots. He's a low end wide receiver one. I think that's possible. The downside risk is he plays more or less within the range of his positional ADP for most of the season, and he becomes completely unstartable in a Jalen Milroe offense when you need him most.
Yeah, I do think with JSN to hit his season this year, like he needs at least 100 receptions. Like I think he needs to be a real volume play, and that could be even though like I think Cooper Kupp's probably done. I think that's going to be tough even with him around. He's going to get a share of those as well. But no DK Metcalf, no Tyler Lockett in situ this year. This is where I wanted to add them because they're obviously like at the high end of cost, and these names are going down by cost. And the next one is back to back with JSN. But I feel like if you're in on this player, you can really see a season where he hits the ceiling. If you're like out on Kyler Murray and you like Trey McBride like I do, like this is a tough one for me. Again, a player that I have not been drafting at all is Marvin Harrison, wide receiver 16. Like second year in the league, maybe things just didn't work out. Like we've seen in the past, maybe a Devontae Adams, things didn't really work out to kick things off. Are we giving up too soon on Marvin Harrison?
Here's where I'll acknowledge that there is a huge ceiling here. I think, I talked about Garrett Wilson as being, I think, small hit, small miss. JSN to me is small hit, big miss. I think Harrison is big hit, big miss. Yeah. We've just saw it with JSN, for instance, as a prospect that we really liked, was not that great as a rookie, progressed in a big way in year 2. Harrison was an exemplary prospect, could definitely hit in a huge way in year 2 as a talent. But if he is kind of what he was last year or a little bit better, he is drastically overpriced for that. And I'm really curious why the market has priced in so much progression for him. It's irritating to me because he's the type of player I'd like to bet on. My concern is that nothing has changed in this environment. He has the same quarterback. He has the same play caller. The entire offense is basically the exact same as it was last year. And yet we have this, like I said, kind of a big miss, big hit range. And in my opinion, the market has priced it a lot closer to the hit end of the spectrum. So I think he is zooming out the type of bet I would like to make. I wrote a piece this summer of is archetypal drafting dead? Because I think in years past, from an archetypal perspective, he is the type of bet I want to make. Yeah. But one of the reasons I'm questioning is archetypal drafting dead is like we are pricing these bets very differently now. And I'm looking at Harrison and I'm thinking this is the type of bet I want to make, but the market has priced it to an extent that I just don't think it's well calibrated. So I could easily see a scenario where he hits and it burns me, and I'm scared of that. But I haven't been clicking him because I just don't think that he's priced reasonably for the percentage of times that he hits huge at that cost, the percentage of times that he misses big at that cost. So it's tough. I want to be a guy who's always saying I'm only caring about upside scenarios, but I'm being a little bit price conscious with Marvin. I think his price is just incorrect.
Yeah, I think that if he was maybe in the 5th round, for example, he would be very appealing based on like a bounce back. But that the offense and the situation with the coaches, they did not put him in any position to succeed last year as a rookie. Now, if that changes and they try and add some stuff that to get him work a little bit more to his strengths, maybe. But the other part is he's like the secondary option in this offense behind Trey McBride, no matter what way anyone wants to shake it. But I do think that the price is just the part that's tough.
And he's going right next to Trey McBride in some formats. Like not on FFPC stuff where it's tight end premium, but like if you're playing on Underdog, they go literally back to back.
Yeah, well, I know which one I would rather.
What world am I living in? Like, how am I looking at this guy? Marvin Harrison had 2 more targets than Trey McBride had catches last year. And I have to draft them back to back. It just doesn't make any sense. And we're not going to talk about Roma Dunze today. He's not on the show sheet. But like at least with a Dunze, I can look at it and say, was last year his fault or was it the circumstances' fault? Because all the circumstances have changed. And so if I want to blame the circumstances, I can buy into the bounce back. With Harrison, if it was his fault, then he's not, at all worth the price. And if it was the circumstances' fault, all of the circumstances are the exact same. So how can I bet on them to all change? It's just very difficult.
You've hit that perfectly, because when you were talking about the Harrison case and the market pricing it aggressively, what I thought of instantly was Roma Dunze. Because at the start of the draft season, I thought like season didn't go great as a rookie, but I thought the price was still like, relatively high. I think it's pretty fair now, but it's interesting that you mentioned that, because Harrison is getting priced very much at that ceiling. Talking about rookies, ceilings, potential, wide receiver 21, Tetairoa McMillan. I'm very excited about McMillan in this situation. I was excited to see Young's kind of development over the course of the second half of last season. Something that I didn't see it coming back to that extent. Was pretty incredible. But we have seen the preseason, if you want to call it drop, not catch from Tet. But I'm very excited to draft him pretty much as much as possible over the next couple of weeks. Feel that he is one of those kind of super high upside, but I also feel high floor play. What are you seeing here with McMillan?
Yeah, to be honest, if I had one main event draft for the whole year and I didn't have to care about ADP, he'd be the first player that I would take of the guys that we've talked about so far. He is a big priority target for me. It was a really, really strong prospect, early declare, productive immediately from year 2 on. Just everything you would look for from a rookie perspective, and such an ideal situation. He gets a pocket quarterback and Bryce Young, scrambles around a little bit too much for wide receiver value, but he still has been able to feed high-end production to 34-year-old Adam Thielen, for instance. And he goes on a team where he's going to have no issues with routes. He's going to be running all the routes from day one. And the target competition is low to medium. There's no one really there that I think is going to be stepping on his targets if he is everything that we want him to be. So it's a really, really exciting situation to walk into, an exciting prospect. And you add in the Panthers' defense is terrible. Every defense in their division is terrible. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for shootouts for all of those NFC South teams that makes them pretty interesting. And yeah, I just think Tat is a guy that if you assume he's a superstar, there's almost no ceiling on how high you can get on him. You know, you can envision a world in which the Panthers have 600, 620 dropbacks and Tet has 150, 160, 170 targets. Like let's get nuts. And basically the only world to me in which he is more than a small miss is if he just isn't good. And that's a risk with every single rookie. But I think if you get yourself to assuming that you've drafted a talented player, I think that he becomes a small miss, big hit guy, and he's a massive target for me.
Yeah, absolutely love him. Love him so much that one of the players I also love, I skipped over to get to him an error, and that was Xavier Worthy, wide receiver 19. Obviously, his situation changed a little bit. Well, not formally at this point, but it will change with Rashee Rice missing the early portion of the season. Worthy, obviously, we've talked here in RotoViz a lot of plays with Mahomes last year that could have made the season look very different. I believe there was a comp going around on social media of like 7 throws that would have like completely changed how people's perspectives are. But even with those perspectives, obviously going in the mid 4th round on FFPC, going a little bit higher, obviously on Underdog with the format over there, Worthy feels like a player who you could say, and I think if you're a Worthy fan, you're like super high ceiling. If you're not a Worthy fan, you're like super low floor. I feel like there is a floor there as well that is pretty safe at his ADP, but I do think there's a huge ceiling. But I think the the competition with, let's say, a Rice or a Kelsey, who's obviously fading at this point of his career, is something in a less pass happy Chiefs offense, and we've seen him not connect outside of the Super Bowl. In fact, with Patrick Mahomes and those deep shots. So, what are you thinking about Worthy for this season?
I'll put him more in the big miss, big hit bucket with Harrison, but I think that the chances of the big hit are much higher because the circumstances are just infinitely better. In this
like better coach, better quarterback.
Like way better play caller, way better quarterback. And the one hold up that I would have had would be the Rashee Rice of it all, where I think that he can just kind of become the black hole that sucks everything else out of the offense, and I mean that complimentary to Rice, even though it doesn't sound like it, but you could just envision this world where it's 32% of the targets are being funneled to Rashee Rice and everybody else is running wind sprints around him. But the suspension that Rice is going to have made a pretty dramatic change in how I view Worthy this year. Admittedly, I was not the biggest Xavier Worthy fan coming out of college. I know that's probably blasphemy to say on RotoViz Radio, but just I thought he was a kind of a limited player. But I love that where he landed because I think Andy Reid is a guy who puts players in positions to succeed. We've seen that with Rice. I think Rice is a limited player, but rather than putting him as a square peg into a round hole, they figured
the opposite of the Marvin Harrison thing again, playing the players to their positions of strength rather than here's the offense, you run this route. It's like you can do this. We're going to get you the ball that way.
Yeah, so it's just so nice to see Worthy, Rice, all these kind of guys that I think have some things that they really excel at, some things that are big holes in their game, put in positions where their holes are de-emphasized and their strengths are put at the forefront. So it's a really interesting spot for Worthy. And I think with Rice suspended, it's just an opportunity for him to establish himself, where if this offense is really successful early in the season with Worthy at the center of it, and then Rice is the one that has to hop onto the moving train, I don't know why he would ever lose that role at that point. I think he might be able to keep more of the short area design targets that he needs to hit that apex ceiling on top of some of the deep looks. The downside scenario is that their offense looks kind of bad, kind of like it did for a lot of last year. Yeah. And then they look at Rashee Rice as their salvation and they say, like, please come back, Rashee. We're going to build the whole offense around you. We can't do anything without you. That's where it hurts. But I think for the most part, really, really high upside scenario on Worthy. And like I've kind of alluded to, a lot of these around 3-4 wide receivers, I'm not very interested in. So Worthy becomes a guy that I'm willing to take the shot on pretty frequently. Definitely drafting him.
Moving into some of the other names, the one I think that is getting a lot of buzz at the moment is George Pickens with the Cowboys. New situation, obviously the wide receiver 2 behind CD Lamb, but steps from being the wide receiver 1 with the Steelers, but is in a much better environment. Like we're talking about where he probably will be set up for that success. He's the wide receiver 25. I think at a very affordable cost in the 5th round over at the FFPC. Are you excited about George Pickens here changing environment? Like when the trade went down, I was like,
extremely.
But then, like, I'm pretty quickly was like, yeah, let's get on board with this.
It's fascinating to me to look at how the perception and the reality of Pickens has evolved over 3 years in the NFL. I thought he was a very kind of overrated player for much of his first season.
Yeah.
When he had some very big flashes, the big one-handed catch on Thursday Night Football. He ran all the routes. There were a lot of routes that year to go around in Pittsburgh. And I thought people overestimated sort of how good he was when his per route figures were not really all that impressive. And then over the last couple of years, there's been less routes period in the offense. He's, missed more routes, I think, just kind of by being an a-hole sometimes. What we've seen is that his production is not really scaled upwards, but his per route data has gotten way, way, way better. So we have the situation where I think a lot of people view him less favorably than they used to. I view him way more favorably than I used to. And he's now in a situation where hopefully that can come together. He could run 120 or 130 more routes than he ran last year. I think this is one of the few things that people really miss out on in wide receiver projections still, is just how different the number of routes these guys can run is when situations drastically change. We talked about with Garrett Wilson. This is a guy who's ran over 600 routes every year, and this is a team that might not hit 500 dropbacks this year. And that is a huge limit to his ceiling. Jerry Jeudy last year, if you look at his targets per route run and his yards per route run, he has essentially been the exact same player for every year of his career. It's like his targets per route run has been between, I think, 0.19 and 0.22 5 years running. And his yards per route run has switched around a little bit. He had 1 year up over 2, but for most of his career, he's been between like 1.6 and 1.9. And last year, we had this, completely different season from him because he ran over 200 more routes than he ever had before. And with Pickens, we have that opportunity now to see if he is just the same player, which has been a full-time player in a brand new environment that's way more beneficial for him. This is a very different translation than when we're talking about Kadarius Toney's targets per route run on 38% of the routes is X. Yeah. What if you ran all the routes? It doesn't always work that way because you're translating a selection biased infused sample. But when we're talking about a player who's already playing full-time snaps in a full-time role, and it's just the number of total team routes or his team changes, you can see that translation go way up or way down in a way for fantasy points. So I'm pumped about George Pickens. I don't think there is any fundamental difference between him and T. Higgins this year. And I think that you're just getting T. Higgins 2 rounds later because he hasn't shown it yet. And so basically all of the T. Higgins that I was drafting last year in the 4th round that I can't draft this year because he's going at the 2-3 turn, I'm just replacing that with George Pickens now. And bypassing actual T. Higgins and taking T 2.0.
If we could go through our drafts and just automatically get Tetairoa McMillan and George Pickens in every single one, I think I would do that heading into the season. You mentioned, the perception, and I think when the trade went down, my perception was probably off that, that he wasn't doing as well as he has. But when you look into the underlying metrics, that certainly isn't the case. So very excited about that. Going to talk about somebody I think is the ultimate of the upside pick for this year, and that is Travis Hunter with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Hit me with your should we be drafting Travis Hunter thoughts?
Yeah, I think we should be drafting Travis Hunter. I mean, we're drafting for upside. Come on.
We're drafting for upside before the positive news starts to trickle in here. Like the upside is through the roof, but it's we're thinking, well, how much defense is he going to play? When it starts where he's leaning into playing much more offense, the wheels are just it's going to go off the tracks here with the hype.
Yeah, I'll do I can do kind of the intellectual case first, which is just this team traded so much for Travis Hunter. There's no world in which you can justify trading a top 5 pick, a future first, and an early second for a cornerback. That doesn't happen. No cornerback has ever been drafted second overall in the history of the NFL. So he has to play offense, at least to some extent, and I think to a majority of the extent. Also, I think people are just completely missing the boat when they talk about, oh, he can't play both sides. Nobody's ever done that. There's a lot of things that nobody's ever done until people do them. And people act like, oh, well, no one's ever done it, so there's no chance he could do it. But we're not looking at just picking some random person in the world and saying, what are the chances he could play both ways in the NFL? We're picking a guy who just did play both ways very successfully in college. His chances of being this massive outlier have already increased exponentially based on what he's already done, based on what he says he wants to do, based on what the team did, based on what the team says he's going to do. And people just don't believe it. It reminds me of when LeBron James was drafted and, Carlos Boozer was saying, well, we already have a power forward. It's like, well, the circumstances have changed because now you have LeBron James and you have to reorient how you think about your team, how you think about the sport of basketball. Travis Hunter is one of those special unicorn players, in my personal opinion, that has to make us re-examine our priors and has to have us make exceptions about what's possible and what isn't. I expect him to play a lot on both sides of the ball. I think that there is no point in a team playing him 50% one and 50% the other, because you could just play him 100% one, not screw up all your substitutions, make his life way easier, not have him practice on two sides of the ball, and still get the same number of snaps in a way more efficient way. If you're going to invest all the time and effort on your behalf and his to have him play on both sides, I think you have to have him play at least 20, 30, 40, 50% more total snaps than if he just played every snap on one side of the ball. So I think he's going to be a 70 to 80% player on offense, at least on pass plays, maybe slightly less than that in total snaps. And I think that's the case even if he plays a similarly full-time amount on defense. And I think that when you start looking, and I have a piece specifically on Hunter at, well, how does this impact his targets? I think not that much, because a lot of the plays that he's going to miss are going to be runs. A lot of the pass plays he's going to miss are going to be designed first read targets for Brian Thomas or other players, running back screens, whatever. And I think that you're going to see the bulk of the targets that he would have earned anyways occur within his snaps. And then the zoomed out view is just, he's going at like the freaking 5-6 turn at this point. So like, if you can draft this guy, I just took him at the 601 on that main event team I was talking about last night as my wide receiver 4, and I already had 2 running backs. So like, you're drafting him as your last starting player. That's like, if he completely busts there, your team is okay. You can draft someone else to come in ahead of him. So I think you're like borderline free rolling the chance to draft, no hyperbole, maybe the best, most impressive football player of all time. Like, what this guy does is unbelievable. I don't know how you would want to put yourself in a position as a person who plays fantasy football obsessively and not want to draft one of the most unicorny of unicorns imaginable when he's available in like the 6th round. It's crazy to me. And I think people should be all in on this and just see what happens.
So some people would think a hot take is, that he is going to be one of the greatest fantasy football players of all time. My question to get a hot take out of you, is there a chance that he's better than Brian Thomas Jr.?
Yeah, I don't think it's like a high chance because like Thomas Jr. is incredible in his own right.
He
but
is,
also there's like a 25% chance that he's better than Brian Thomas Jr. This year. Also, there's like maybe like a 40% chance he is by next year. But my main thing is I don't think it matters. This is another big argument of people that I think are misinterpreting the numerator versus the denominator. Is people are like, well, you can't have 2 wide receivers earn over 50% of the targets. It's like, well, normally you don't see that because there are very few wide receivers who can earn 25% of the targets next to good target competition. That's like earning 25% of the targets next to another elite target earner is extremely difficult, and very few wide receivers are capable of doing that. But if you happened to put Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase on the same team, I guarantee you they would earn like a 55% target share and the team would rule. Like that would happen because they're both that unique of talents. The odds are Travis Hunter's probably not a Justin Jefferson level talent because that's an impossible bar to put on anybody. But I'm just saying if he is, him and Thomas are going to earn a crap load of targets together. And that's especially the case because look at the rest of this offense. De'Ami Brown, what are we? Are we 2021 RotoViz? Like it's over with the enough.
It never happened, unfortunately. Almost at the end of last season, we got some points to reminisce about.
Yeah, exactly.
I think we're capped.
Brenton Strange, Parker Washington, and it's the running backs. It's Tank Bigsby, who is like, I think has 6 catches in 2 years. And Tutin's a fine pass catcher. He's not a great one. ETN is maybe a little better, but probably a little overrated. So I think it's like very easy to envision that all the rest of these guys are just tertiary pieces and it's all Hunter and Thomas earning the targets. So I think that the enthusiasm for Hunter does not need to come at Thomas's expense.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. But I just wanted to finish with a hot take to close things out. But
for sure,
we have had the 2 shows. We did the running backs earlier this week, wide receivers here with Jakob. Jakob, give a plug to your Substack. Let the listeners know what they can find over there.
Yeah, you can find all my work at Thinking About Thinking, which is the name of my Substack. It's Jakob Sanderson, my name.substack.com. It's also linked in my Twitter profile if you want to check it out easily. I have Dynasty rankings there. I have Best Ball rankings there. I have redraft rankings there. I am also writing pretty frequently throughout August. We'll have the preseason Hitchhiker's Guide to Running Back, which is going to go through every backfield in the NFL, who I think are targets, trade candidates for Dynasty, fades. And then we'll have in season it'll be the 4th year I've done the Hitchhiker's Guide column in season, where we'll talk about all the running back usage from the week that was, how I think various injuries might affect the backfields, and then ultimately I'll rank sort of all of these streaming quality running back candidates going into the next week. And I'll have a bunch of different features and stuff on Dynasty and midseason best ball, whatso have you, throughout the year as well. I'd love to have anybody come on board.
That's awesome. And I do have to say, I really appreciate the De'Ami Brown 2021 shout out. That was a real quick way to dive in. We had the FFPC Main Event, Best Ball Tournament team, where we came second to Conor O'Driscoll in 2021. And in that week 17, we were like down, few players missing out, but we were hoping to get some De'Ami Brown points. It did not happen. So we came in second place to Conor on that situation. But appreciate the time, Jakob. It's been fun. Hopefully the listeners have enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe to the RotoViz podcast feed to get those once they are available. And until we are back, have a good one.